Welcome to this on-demand module over the Avid Tutorial request form. Remember that the purpose of Avid Tutorials is to increase student achievement in academic classes. Therefore, rigorous preparation that holds students accountable to think at high levels is the cornerstone of tutorials. Throughout this brief training, you will understand the updated tutorial request form and how it pushes students' critical thinking. Understand how the tutorial request form leads to students presenting their tutorial question in a clear, concise manner which allows group members to ask appropriate questions. And finally, you will understand how to assign points to each section of the TRF to tabulate student grades. So, how can the tutorial request form move students to deeper levels of thinking? Let's examine each section of the TRF to see how. Page 1 of the TRF is considered inquiry-based pre-work to be completed at home the night before the tutorial. Students fill out the subject of their question, the essential question from the day's lesson, their name, avid period, and date. Next, they will write their initial tutorial question and identify the source of their question. It is important that this is an authentic question which, at this point in their thinking, may or may not be a higher level one. It is the thinking that comes after this initial question that will push students to think more critically. Students should be thinking, as I review my notes, resources, textbook, workbooks, quizzes, and tests, what is something I really don't understand? Students should then think about the academic vocabulary associated with their question. It is important that they identify at least two key terms for the question, define those words, and embed them into their thinking. Students should use their resources for the definitions, and then try to define the terms in their own words. The next step in the critical thinking protocol is for students to write what they already know about their question, their prior knowledge. It is not acceptable for students to say they don't know anything here. They must think and record any knowledge that they have about their initial question. They need to think through these steps, and students should be asking themselves, what do I know about my initial question? How can I organize this information? Can I connect this concept to prior knowledge from this content area or another subject? Critical thinking about the initial question is next. To think through this step, students should look at their initial question and record their initial thinking in steps. They should be asking themselves, what can I show about my question? What does my textbook or notes say about this topic? Students should then record the steps attempted in a logical sequence. Once students have thought through these steps, it should lead them to their point of confusion. This point of confusion becomes the question that should be brought to tutorial. Let's work through an example. For our purposes today, we will use an initial question a teacher might ask about tutorials. This initial question is, how do I recruit tutors? Remember, this may or may not be a higher level question. In this section, the terms important to the initial question are recruit and tutor. These have been defined here in the presenter's own words to be shared so that the group members also understand the language used during the tutorial session. The presenter has noted what is already known about Avid tutors. He knows the number of tutors recommended, the number needed at his site for all classes, and who might be available to fulfill the role of tutor. Here, the presenter has recorded his thinking about his question and has noted what he knows about recruiting tutors at this point. In number 5, he has identified what the real problem just may be. Need for resources and funding for tutors. So the process has gotten him to his real point of confusion. Now you can see the presenter has noted the process he has taken thus far in trying to answer the question himself. He noted what he has already done, included looking at various options and identifying funding as the key obstacle in recruiting tutors for the AVID elective class. He is now ready to write his point of confusion in the form of a question, which allows him to complete the last section of page 1 of the TRF. I want to take some time now for some additional items you might want to consider. You may need to now define funding and how much funding is needed to pay your tutors. You may need to research the pay rate in your district and identify the total number of hours you will need tutors working in order to determine how much funding is needed. Don't forget, you will need a 7-to-1 student-tutor ratio. The presenter has now rewritten his tutorial question from the point of confusion that resulted from deeper thinking in a systematic way. As you can see, the question he will bring to tutorial is much more refined and truly identifies what he needs to know. The information from the pre-work recorded on the TRF becomes the content for the presenter when he is presenting his question to the group members during tutorials. The 30-second speech. These 5 steps ask the presenter to share the information gathered on the TRF, including the initial question and the question from the point of confusion. He also shares key vocabulary, defining for the group if necessary, explains what work has already been completed, including what is already known, what connections have been made, and what steps are already attempted. At this point, the revised question is now turned over to the group for help. Through the group's questioning, the presenter should arrive at greater understanding of his question or a possible solution. Reflection is an extremely important part of the tutorial process. Be sure to leave enough time at the end of class to give students the opportunity to process their learning. The reflection on the updated tutorial request form is scaffolded and provides prompts for the students, so they in essence are writing a reflection, not a summary. Please remember that students should reflect immediately after their learning, not hours later as part of homework. At this point, you may be asking yourself, where is the notes section on the TRF? The answer is that students should be taking 3-column notes during tutorials, but those notes should be separate from the TRF and kept in their binders for reference material. If you decide to collect the TRF to grade, students still have their notes to review and study. It will be necessary to scaffold the use of the TRF. Students will not be able to do this entire process at first try. Set clear expectations that students complete the front page of the TRF prior to arriving for tutorials. You may need to give them time in class at the beginning so that they can ask questions and work with a partner to complete the TRF. Explain that this will be the process and form used during tutorials in the AVID class. Work section by section, with the students supplying the essential question and the initial question to begin the process. Use a subject or a topic with which they are familiar, and model how you would complete the form. Model with a think aloud how you, as a presenter, might complete the TRF for a question of your own. Allow students to work in small groups or with partners to complete their TRF in class until they are confident in completing it as homework. And practice, practice, practice. don't require all the reflection questions at first. Share some of the ones that you find that are especially insightful or well done. Use these as models. And don't forget to collect and copy samples to include in your evidence for Essential 8. As always, it's important to give students feedback on their work in the form of a grade so they know what they did well and where they can improve. Suggested point values for each of the sections of the TRF are indicated on the form. Locating copies of the TRF and other tutorology materials is easy. Simply log on to MyAvid, click on File Sharing, then click on Tutorology. On the left, you will see the tutorology request form along with other resources. We hope this training has helped you better understand the updated tutorial request form and has given you greater insight on today's guiding question: how does the TRF move students to deeper levels of thinking, which ultimately increases rigor?